Welcome to the Spoiler Alert podcast, and today we're going to be reviewing Gangs of New York for St. Patrick's Day. Happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody. I would be wearing green, but I would just be a floating head right now. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everybody to hit the like button, subscribe to us on YouTube, subscribe to us on Spotify, anywhere you get podcasts. Would really help. We also have a Patreon if you'd like to contribute to that. Other than that, we'll just get right into it. Gangs of New York was released in 2002 and directed by Martin Scorsese. And this one's notable for being, I believe, the first collaboration between Scorsese and DiCaprio. And Scorsese's, if not my favorite, probably like a top 2 or 3 favorite director ever.
Definitely, yeah.
Like some of his best movies, Raging Bull and Taxi Driver. Gangs of New York is kind of considered like a mid-tier Scorsese film.
Yeah, I remember that at the time, but I mean, like looking back on it, I mean, I think it's like his low tier is still leagues beyond, really anything. So
exactly, like he has like a ridiculous standard basically, because Gangs of New York, I think is actually like pretty damn relevant, and kind of like how countries can like tear themselves apart, and how like the origins of things aren't as pretty as like the stories.
I know, I was thinking that through the whole film, I'm like, this is timeless, like this is totally applicable to today in a lot of ways, and so even though it's 20 years ago, I mean probably this year, so yeah. I mean, it feels completely like if this came out probably this year, I'd be like, this is genius, right? It was just like you said, it's a lower tier Scorsese film, only by Scorsese standards, right? So
it's pretty damn applicable. Any kind of person that is a descendant of an immigrant, down like to relating to slavery and stuff like that, like it touches on like a little bit of everything, like in a surprising way. And most of the kind of like historical inaccuracies basically say that it's not, that like a lot of the violence is embellished and it wasn't quite as violent as it's portrayed in the film, in terms of like having like these standoff battles and those kind of things.
The massive death toll, that we see at the very beginning.
But the riots and everything like that we see later in the film, that's all true. And the other thing is that there wasn't much of a Chinese population in New York at this point. It was still kind of on the western side of the country. But that's like that's like kind of nitpicking though.
Yeah, no, I think the Chinese thing is supposed to kind of evoke, the railroad workers from, but that would be like about 20 years into the future, I mean, like, and it seems almost ridiculous because like if you were like, we're going to take everything from now, from like the 80s to the 2020s, and just kind of like mix it all together and create this through line, this sort of theme or idea. And I mean, you can do that. Like you can see where a lot of things that started in the 80s, are still echoing or rippling out to today, but so much has changed decade by decade that it's playing a little fast and loose, but I look at it like, with a character portrait, you're taking somebody's whole life and you're condensing it down to like 2.5 hours, 3 hours. And your job is to be the frame. You define the borders of that character and what you want to show. And so it's like, if you were to take the same approach to time itself and try to like really define the better part of this aspect of the last century, like that's, I think, what Gangs of New York is trying to do. It's not trying to be completely faithful to the date. I think that's one of the mistakes early on in the movie, is like, maybe just not even have a specific date attached to it. Like for one thing, like DiCaprio's character doesn't even know his own age. So we don't really need to see this as even 16 years later. Like I might've just excised that along with any dates. And we're just kind of trying to create a general, sense of the time rather than anything specific. I guess the draft riots do kind of put a timestamp on it, but it's hugely enjoyable. So like, I mean, but yeah, if not altogether historically accurate. So
like you were saying, I think it does a good job of like kind of encapsulating different kinds of immigration too. because we're not going to see the immigration that you see in San Francisco that you're going to see in New York. It's going to be a little different, right? But
Right.
that's like basically the one of the only things I've seen them point at in terms of historical inaccuracy. But still, that just means that almost everything else in this is at least somewhat accurate, which is kind of mind blowing when you think of like all like the underground tunnels and the slums and you
Yeah.
know, the corruption with Boss Tweed and all that was pretty freaking accurate actually.
Right.
But yeah, so just to get into it, speaking of the tunnels, the film opens with a close up of Liam Neeson shaving. Liam Neeson is Priest Valen. He shaves and then he cuts himself with the razor and leaves the blood on the razor blade and gives it to his son. So basically his lesson to his son is, never wipe off the blood off the razor, which is kind of like a whole like theme throughout the story where it's like, don't forget about history. Don't forget about like the blood that is the cost to, freedom and whatnot, or, bettering your lives, that kind of thing. The kid gives his father the razor back, and then his father gives him this Saint Michael medallion. I forgot what they said Saint Michael's power was, but it was
It was Saint Michael banished Satan to hell or something, like,
yeah, he,
so
he
cast Satan
banished
out.
Satan from paradise or
Yeah.
something. Yeah. And then we kind of start walking through these underground slums. It's like one of the scenes in the entire movie that sticks up for me the most. It's like post-apocalyptic or something with people living underground, like weasels. And
That's actually interesting because that was something I didn't know if I should say or not, but I was thinking so later on in the film, DiCaprio's character almost has to kind of go underground in a way, for a period in the film. And really the whole time it's, in a way, it kind of evoked like silence, in that whole movie, and the idea of you have to keep your faith secret and underground in order for it to endure and survive and whatever. And
in the Matrix, like when you're actually with the people like in the real world, that's like hellish and all that. Like it looks like
yeah,
that.
right, like that.
And they pan out and there's like a big fucking like slum shelf or whatever. I don't even know what you'd call it.
Well, I think you're alluding to, I mean, there's a lot of the underground to New York. I mean, like just a long history of bootlegging and forgotten subway stations. I was watching something about some German spy and there was some secret vault or something. I can't remember. Like there's just so much underground stuff to New York that, yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Liam Neeson, who is Priest Valen, all the way through these tunnels was gathering basically his army of dead rabbits, which are like a Irish tribe in, at the 5 Points in New York.
As I was watching the movie, everything does feel kind of like tribal, and maybe I'm just talking out my ass, but like it seemed like it almost evoked kind of like Celtic tribalism, where like for one thing, okay, so there are just like a lot of tits out like through the movie, and it like the camera isn't like, so, it doesn't really, it's just everybody's naked, it's hedonistic, it evokes just sort of like, this is kind of like the primordial soup out of which maybe movies like later Scorsese movies might have developed, like Goodfellas and whatever that take place in New York, Mean Streets and whatever. But it's, yeah, you said it, just it's yeah, there is a tribal feel to it. It's they're smeared in paint.
So they're coming up by this doorway towards the outside, and there's this guy named Monk.
He's very mercenary. He's only going to fight alongside him for the right price. Yeah.
Yep. He's a mercenary. He's kind of cool. He's got like this big club with notches and he charges 10 per notch. He's like, all right, we have a deal. And then he kicks the door open and it's just snowy outside. It's a pretty cool shot.
Yeah. The camera kind of moves out through the door. Like it doesn't cut or anything. And it's just silence. Yeah. Silence.
Yep. And then Bill the Butcher shows up with about what we see at first, like 10 fighters. And Bill the Butcher has like this fake eye that's his left eye. It's got like an American eagle on it and stuff. It kind of looks cool. Tribes and tribes of Irish Catholic immigrants and tribes of native Protestants. Yeah. So when they say native, they're not saying Native American like we know now. They mean
True American.
previous immigrants from usually before the like around the time of the Revolutionary War is what they considered themselves as being native. So even though they're like English and whatever else, if they've been around, if their family lineage has been around for the Revolutionary War, they consider themselves native, and they're all Protestants.
I don't know, it just seems so obvious that they're so much more similar than not or whatever, and it just seems kind of absurd. But like, I mean, for one thing, like, I mean, DiCaprio says that, I mean, he's born here, right? I mean, he's not really from Ireland, he's an American, right? But he's still not, by Day-Lewis's standards, he's in like this, what I mean, so
purgatory or whatever,
right? Yeah, which just seems so absurd and ridiculous and whatever, but there is that distinction, so maybe in a few generations, what does that make him American? Like, I mean, how long do you have to be?
Right.
I guess you were there from the start. I mean, maybe makes you an American, and then everybody else is just the poser, like I don't.
And again, like this movie is so honest with how tribalistic it was, because I mean, if you think about it, there was an era of time where like Irish people would only get married to Irish people, and Italian people would only get married to Italian people. You still kind of see it. It's just not a reinforced thing all the time, or at least as much as it used to be back in this time. It would be crazy how like people would see like ethnicities that, like you mentioned, aren't even all that different. They just couldn't stand each other, even with the slightest difference.
Yeah, even just the concept of America. I mean, it's weird because it's like we are a melting pot, but it's a slow. I mean, I think it's just the melting is very slow.
It is way messier than people like to think of it.
I mean, people live kind of separately, and then obviously over a very extended period of time, like we kind of see what we have now, and that is sort of a mixing of cultures and whatever. But I think it probably took a long time to get there. Initially there were probably things like this where just absolutely not, an unstoppable force and an immovable object smashing against each other.
200 years from now, it look probably really different even from the way it is now. But
I'm sure much of what's happening now will seem absolutely absurd in the same way, I mean, so
these two forces, the Catholics and the Protestants, line up their tribes and they all declare themselves, and then they both have like really operatic kind of like theater-ish like speeches and performances that are kind of like awesome and cool, but also like over the top and almost kind of campy in a good way though.
Well, yeah, I do think there's a self-awareness there. I think they're almost playing out, like the expectation of this age-old rivalry. Like he comes out with the cross, like he's gonna banish Satan from the earth. Like you said, just so much theatricality to it. But I mean, I think that's the whole point, I think that's what Day-Lewis's character, Bill the Butcher, is yearning for. It's like, later on in the film, like, I mean, without jumping ahead, but like he just wants that, he lived for that.
Makes it exciting for him, you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, because I mean, without the non-Americans, what the hell is he, right? So it's like he's defined by his opposite. You need the other side of the coin for him to even matter, and for I mean, so
he's found so much success doing it that way and working through fear.
Yeah, his total disdain for politics, right? I mean, he doesn't want to be a part of that future. He likes the fucking brawl in the street, it's like,
right. I mean, he'll do what he can to get what he wants out of politicians, but he likes the physical contact. He's a doer, you know what I mean? Yeah. He's not really much managerial skills. He would rather just be the one that's the best at, doing.
Right.
So they eventually, after all this, theatricality, they all attack each other, and it's kind of like a montage of a fight. The score kind of actually becomes a little more modern. It's kind of interesting.
I was going to say exactly that. Yeah, no, which is interesting. So I think that, again, lending itself to the timelessness of this, right? I mean, things change, but remain the same. And so, yeah, it's interesting that you noted that, because I thought the same thing. I'm like, it's I think it was trying to comment on the timelessness. You got guitar riffs and, and electronic kind of sounds and whatever,
And then in the battle, Bill the Butcher kills Priest Valen. And once they see that one of the leaders went down, they sounded a horn, and then everybody stopped fighting. Bill just like starts shouting, like, who is this under my knife, claiming his victory, kind of. We get pieces of this in this scene, but we get a lot more of it later on, where we learn that he admired Priest Valen like a lot for kind of just being a badass, basically.
Yeah, he says nobody will touch him. Like, I mean, he's gonna cut the noses and ears off of all the other dead, but nobody touches his body,
There's like a weird kind of grim nobility in their way of fighting.
And again, that might almost be, again, self-aware, where it's like they understand the need for each other and the role that they're both playing. And it, I mean, I do think there is a lot. Yeah.
I don't know, like everyone kind of plays their own role in society. They're playing their own role in society. It's just a very bigger and louder role than a lot of them.
Right.
Like you were just saying, after Priest Valen says finish it, and the butcher puts him out of his misery, the kid, who's Amsterdam Valen, he just sprints out of there and starts running, and almost gets away. A kid helps him on the way, but he basically gets thrown into an orphanage in New York, in a different part of New York. I think it actually raised him to be Protestant. I don't think it said specifically, but I think his orphanage was a Protestant one. So like he wasn't getting, the beliefs that he was actually raised to have. It was 16 years, right? Yeah. So we get like this big zoom out of what the city looks like in 1846, and we see the 5 points. These streets all meet at this one point called the 5 points. It's basically where it's a real location where a lot of crime happened throughout history. But like we were saying, DiCaprio, who plays Amsterdam, the boy that ran away, returns to New York, throws his Protestant Bible into the river, and then we're just kind of brought back into this new time. So it's 1862 right now. The Civil War is really getting going. There's talks about a draft. As soon as Irish immigrants are taken off of the ship, they have to sign up to enlist in the army for a war that they literally had nothing to do with.
But it's funny that they can buy their way out for $300, but nobody obviously has $300. So, but that would fund the war effort. So,
and then we're introduced to Boss Tweed, who's like this real life crime boss who would get elected and have like a bunch of political power, be funneling money from, like we see later in the movie, like just firehouses where people would set homes on fire, and it would be
as a pretense to rob the entire complex blind.
Yes, as a pretense to rob, and also get paid from being the fire department that put the fire out. He's just the most corrupt person probably of that era. The quote that he had like in his first scene here is, "The appearance of the law must always be upheld, especially when it's being broken."
Yeah, we see that later. Again, you use the word theater, which definitely applies. I mean, maybe jumping ahead, but obviously the theater of the 4 executions later in the film, and everybody knows what's happening, but I mean, and it just seems so ridiculous, but to uphold illusions, they execute 4 people who are willing. I mean, I'm assuming they're being paid off, so their families will get something, because Bill's like, I'll give you $1.50 for you, for the pendant that his mother gave or whatever. I mean, a lot of maintaining of appearances,
maintaining of like the appearance of stability. Yeah, even though it's totally not. And then Johnny and Jimmy, who would later become friends, actually start off by trying to rob Amsterdam. That's also like right around the scene where he first runs into Jenny, who's played by Cameron Diaz. But Johnny was actually the kid from when he was young that tried to help him and try to save him. So he introduces himself later on and basically introduces him to his friend Jimmy. And another one of the friends he introduces him to is played by Stephen Graham, who's in a lot of Scorsese stuff, Boardwalk Empire. He's in The Irishman, stuff like that. He was also in Snatch.
Oh yeah, that's something I was gonna recommend, obviously, for St. Patrick's Day. Yeah, but
That's right. So this is kind of like the young kind of group, right? The young group of people looking to prove themselves. And like I was just explaining about the firehouses, the next scene that we have here is the next big scene is two fire trucks competing to both loot and then eventually put out the fire, but they were like looting well before they put any water on the fire. And then like you were talking about, like they decide that they want to just do it to the next one. So they break windows and start robbing that place and set that one on fire. And in that scene, DiCaprio and his new friends end up stealing some necklaces, some stuff like that. DiCaprio has to save his buddy from the fire.
The music box seemed to have significance. Did you ever figure out what that was about?
I think it just kind of became his thing.
Okay. I mean, he risked his life for it, but yeah, I mean, I didn't know what for actually. So I think, yeah, that seems like a drop plot line to me or something, but I don't know. Feels like something's missing there, but whatever. Point is, he risks his life for it. DiCaprio saves him. He, and pulls him out. And Bill witnesses that a certain degree of, he risks his life for his friend.
A little bit of admiration for
yeah, I mean, there's loyalty there. Yeah, probably honor amongst thieves, literally, kind of thing.
Yeah, so. And also in that scene too, when Bill actually pulls up on his fire truck, like he looks like the devil driving a train. Like it's all like lit red and it just looks demonic.
My favorite Day-Lewis roles is when he's played a villain. Like in There Will Be Blood, he's just flushed red and looks like the fucking literal devil. I mean, he's just so goddamn good. He's good in anything, but as a villain, he's just next level. So yeah, because I would actually say this is my second favorite Day-Lewis role, right? I mean, There Will Be Blood in this. So
probably, I mean, honestly, like this one, it holds up to, you can't imagine anyone else doing this role now. You know what I mean?
No. Yeah, I mean, I had heard that like maybe De Niro would do it. I'm sure he would have been great in everything. But I mean, but like I think De Niro became more of a working man actor by the early 2000s, so yeah, Day-Lewis just, I mean, it doesn't fucking matter. The method, and like it seems pretentious, but when I actually listen to him, I think he's insane. I think he believes it. I think he believes it's necessary. And honestly, the results speak for themselves. And he's very selective about his roles. And he spends like, he quits and then he takes 5-10 years and he comes back. And I mean, because he knows it's going to take like 2 years of studying some useless shit that absolutely isn't going to, like, I mean, I don't know. He's a madman, but yeah, he's amazing. I mean, and this is probably my second favorite role. There Will Be Blood, would just is absolutely astounding. Yeah. So
they have some loot. John C. Reilly, who is a cop now, who was actually used to be one of the dead rabbits, but as we see, like a lot of those old guys are now doing something different under like the power of like Bill.
Yeah, even Johnny. I mean, yeah, basically everybody's been folded under Bill. And there's kind of an irony there where like John C. Reilly is seen standing side by side with Liam Neeson, and obviously it's a childhood memory and everything, but like the impression is that he's a loyalist, whereas the more mercenary Brendan Gleeson actually turns out to be the more honorable, at the end of the day,
Yeah, so, you're right.
Reilly's kind of a rat bastard, and Gleeson is the one who, despite being a merc, does believe in his people.
He has code, yeah. Kind of code, that kind of thing. But yeah, so John C. Reilly shows up and confiscates most of the loot as being his payment for protecting them, yada, yada, yada. It's just kind of bullshit. But right from the jump, DiCaprio's character Amsterdam is thinking of ways to kill the butcher because he saw the butcher at the firehouse thing. He actually asks what Bill is going to be doing for the ceremony, and he showed him with the lit up whiskey, basically showed him what the demonstration was going to look like.
There was this steadfast resolve throughout to kill Bill.
From the jump, he had premeditated, the assassination attempt, all that kind of stuff, and the desire to kill Bill. Oh. But as he drew closer to him, it kind of became like one of those Captain Ahab things or the Seawolf things where he kind of starts to admire him.
Yeah.
And like admire things about him and sees that they're not so different, but still steadfast in his goal to kill Bill the Butcher. So there's this rat fight. During this rat fight, the butcher gives Amsterdam and Johnny orders to basically rob a ship in the harbor. And they get on the ship and everyone's already dead. So they kind of panic. But Amsterdam grabs one of the dead bodies with Jimmy. And they throw it into the boat. And then they end up trading.
It might damage some organs that drop. But whatever, They still use the body.
Yeah, they just threw it into the boat. But they donated the body to science for money. So they got some money for it. And then a little bit of it got in the press clippings too. But Bill liked that it was in the press because it made him look like an even bigger threat.
Right, yeah, which now that you point out is all he really seems to be concerned with, right? Actually, the more notoriety he has, the better. So by some standards that might be a massive fuck up, right? We drew attention to ourselves, but he loves it. So and he likes Amsterdam's go-getter attitude as far as like coming away with something
improv, you know what I mean? Like he can get at least something out of a shit situation,
right?
And another former dead rabbit who's now turned the butcher's like lackey he was the totally bald guy who's like very traditional, like religious, even more so than the other people like in that group, because he didn't like that they had sold a dead body because he thought that was like a defilement. So he starts this fight with DiCaprio and they box and kind of wrestle, and then Amsterdam wins. So that's another thing where Bill is still like
complete, the typical fighting Irish kind of thing.
And Bill, gives him a steak to ice up his black eye. Bill's impressed with Amsterdam to this point. Jenny ends up pickpocketing Amsterdam in the street. Amsterdam even kind of knows that she's a pickpocket from the first time he saw her. Right. She actually steals his medallion, which he gets really mad about, chases her over on a trolley. He kind of spies on her for a while and sees what she does. She pickpockets this guy on the trolley, and then she also pulls up to rich houses and dresses as a maid, and then just like steals a bunch of their shit and walks out. And then he catches her and basically like requests his medallion back and gets it. And it's kind of like sexy because she busts her blouse open. They have a dance that's like hosted by like a all Christian kind of, it's not a club, but like an all Christian area where people, Catholic and Protestants, can go and dance. And so he picks Cameron Diaz as being dance queen, if you will, and sits on a chair and holds a mirror to look at the man behind her and either shakes yes or no if she wants to dance with him. It's no, 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 no. Then Johnny comes up, who has a more obvious crush on her than Amsterdam did. And he's got his music box and he's really trying to be sweet. And then she says no. And then she sees Amsterdam And Amsterdam immediately thinks it's no, so he just moves on. But then she says yes.
Yeah, he doesn't linger, and so he's always playing hard to get by just like kind of. I mean, I don't think that's what he's doing, but I think that's the appeal to her. Is that he's
Right.
just like, yeah, I'm not gonna stand here and take this, basically, and he starts to walk off. So one thing I like about it is that the love triangle, like, you know, like one Johnny doesn't just take it laying down, which a lot of people, you know, probably wouldn't, and so that, yeah, kind of becomes a thing later on in the film. It's not just like, oh, you won, you know, and I'm just gonna, you know, I'm gonna dignify, I'm gonna take that on the chin, you know,
Right.
kind of festers, you know.
And then they go over to the harbor. They basically just show each other their scars. And then she talks about how she used to be with the butcher. And then he's like, I don't want the butcher's sloppy seconds. And then Boss Tweed approaches Bill about getting the new Irish immigrants to vote, because they're starting to be more and more and more. They're going to have an overwhelming population, so their vote's going to really start mattering. But Bill doesn't want to, because he doesn't want to deal with them at all, because he thinks of Irish people as like the lowest of the low. Again, most of these immigrants have to go straight to war and enlist. Like, there's like a big shot of people going from one boat, signing up, getting a uniform on, getting a rifle, and getting into another boat to go south and fight the war, which is a pretty
which they're
crazy
deeply
thing.
resentful of, you know. I
Yeah.
mean, like, that comes up in the movie. Yeah, I mean, understandably, you might be, you know. It's like,
yeah, like if you just did the work to like just immigrate, like it's a hard ask to be like, all right, now go fight for your country. Now there's a play going on where like Abraham Lincoln is there and they all kind of throw lettuce and tomatoes at him. Someone acting as Abraham Lincoln in the play. And Bill the Butcher is really getting behind it, because the Butcher is like anti-war in the same way that he's like anti-immigration. Like, they don't see it as their war, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like a brutal war. Like, it's literally killing more Americans, civilians and whatnot, than any other war ever did. Someone kind of sneaks up, and they kind of think it's Tweed. It's one of Tweed's men, because Bill had just denied getting the Irish vote. So this guy shows up with a pistol, and then Amsterdam sees it, gets the pistol out of the guy's hand, and the pistol did shoot one bullet into Bill's shoulder, though. But basically, Amsterdam saves Bill.
It's hard to say if he's operating just on purely instinct, or if it's like nobody gets to kill him but me, you know, kind of thing. And
that's a good point. And then this is another scene where like Daniel Day-Lewis is really over the top in a good way, where he's got the knife and he's like, I'll be giving the sermon tonight. Like, I'm going to teach you to speak English with this fucking knife, that kind of thing.
Even though nothing actually happens, if you think about it, throughout the whole course of the film, really, with Bill, there's the omnipresent threat that he is a butcher and he will rip your guts out, your spleen, your stomach, your heart, whatever. It does a really good job of that, of creating like this threat, you know, just by nature of what he does for a living, you know.
So Amsterdam saved Bill, so that's like another big deal. And now like Bill likes Amsterdam and wants, you know, to treat him well and stuff like that. So they basically party the rest of the night. They throw prostitutes around, opium, all kinds of shit. And then Amsterdam and Jenny end up getting it on upstairs, and has like a pretty damn violent beginning to that. That will be startling. But again, not too unrealistically violent. In the morning, Bill is there kind of watching them sleep, which is a little creepy.
Yeah, no, it's super creepy, because you think for one thing that maybe Johnny has informed Bill at this point in the movie, right? Like he already knows because of the nature of the conversation. It's kind of a lot like, you know, The Departed, where it's like, do you want to ask me something, Frank? You know, that whole scene, you know, because you're right, there's a tension there. It's like, what do you know? What do you not know?
And Bill's got the American flag draped over him, and it's probably like the most impressive dialogue scene in the whole movie, where Bill tells the story of he and Priest Valen, where Priest Valen, so Amsterdam's father, they were very different people. Like, obviously one was Protestant native and one was Irish Catholic, but he really kind of looked up to Priest Vallon in a lot of ways, because the way he describes it too was like, it was the finest beating I ever took. Bill the Butcher was beaten within an inch of his life by Priest Vallon. When the priest came over, like was about to like do the finishing blow, Bill looks away, like in fear.
He felt such shame he couldn't look him in the eye.
So he would have cut out both of his eyes, but he knew he needed one. But he cut out his own eye and then mailed it to him in blue paper. I think the competition of fearlessness is a major theme in Gangs of New York, where it's like, you have to do the most powerful thing to survive and to climb out of the shit. You have to be not just fearless, but you have to instill fear in others.
Yeah, it almost feels like a Vietnam movie where it's like, welcome to the suck, you know, like it's basically New York. Everybody gets off the boats. It's welcome to the suck, you know, but
kind of,
yeah.
Very much so. Right after Bill leaves, Jenny and Amsterdam start talking about Jenny's past relationship with Bill, and she kind of brings up that she was an orphan. He took her in. They didn't get sexual until she wanted him to, which was like the saving grace of the scene, because other than that, it was pretty dark as well.
Amsterdam's like an all-time low. I mean, at this point, he saved Bill's life by betraying his own. Well, he gets confronted Brendan Gleeson's character right after that scene, you know, where it's like, you know, your father might have been many things, he's reckless, whatever, but, you know, he loved his people. And so it's like, I don't know if you're being incredibly stupid or, you know, or whatever, like, I mean, but don't turn on your people, kind of thing. So he feels like an absolute traitor. And Bill even bows before him for like, thank you for saving my life kind of thing. And it's like, that must just sting like hellfire. And then Bill gives the kind of like, you know, oh, you're with Cameron Diaz, you know, it's like, yeah, my blessing, right? And so like just all these, you know, hats off to you moments, he feels like such a rat bastard, you know, by this point, it's like boiling over, you know? So I think he's irrational by that point in the film.
And then right before a knife show, Johnny rats out on Amsterdam because Johnny's jealous and wants to get Amsterdam out of the picture so he can try to get with Cameron Diaz's character, Jenny. It's not really well thought out, but he rats on Amsterdam and tells Bill that his last name is Vallon, and he's the son of Priest Vallon. So at the knife show, Bill invites Jenny up to go on the stage. He kind of plays like the spectacle of like knife throwing at like her skirt, like just around by her ear, that kind of stuff, and gets really close with her and is like drunk and kind of like more aggressive than usual, and it's scary.
Yeah, I mean, from the very onset, they're worried because I mean, before Diaz shows up on stage, yeah, I mean, he's clearly aggressive, you know, and so they're like, something's up. There's just a thick, goddamn, sorry, tension through that whole scene, you know. I mean, yeah, that they know there's a subtext in this whole scene, you know, that's playing out. So
exactly, and then they lead to the toast with the flaming whiskey, and that's when Amsterdam knows now's the time to make the move. So he throws a knife, but it gets deflected because Bill the Butcher sees it coming. And then
they must expect that, like, if he's going to strike, it's going to be at this moment on the anniversary, you know?
Right. So, yeah. And then he throws the knife back and gets him in the gut. He does survive it, but it's like another like really theatrical thing. Like you were alluding to before, he was like, how should we have him today? Lamb or chop or whatever, you know, like he just bludgeons his face with his forehead. Most violent headbutting you can imagine. There's blood dripping down Bill the Butcher's face.
I almost feel like that's a moment where the theater of it breaks because like DiCaprio spits in his face and then just pure rage overcomes him. He's like, smash, you know, we're going to tenderize the meat. He smashes his fucking head against his, and it's insane, but yeah, it's awesome too. Sorry,
yes. They decide not to kill him, but he leaves him scarred by taking like a hot knife and leaving him scarred. And yeah, it like, really affected Leonardo DiCaprio's looks. It's really holding him back now. But
But he's obviously playing this thing out, right? Like much like Valen did to him, he's doing to DiCaprio, and he's got to walk in shame,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
And then Jenny wants to take Amsterdam to San Francisco, so they talk about that a little bit. And then this is the scene where Monk returns Valen's razor because he had like confiscated that when he was also like supposedly taking his payment. So he took that to return to his son. After that happens, then Amsterdam nails a dead rabbit to the center post of the 5 points. So
some time has passed by that, but I think it's like 3 months.
Yes, some time has passed. He's recovered from his injuries. The dust is kind of settled, but he's like coming back out into the world, about to start some shit.
The big thing here is that you're not allowed to speak. It's like Voldemort. You're not allowed to speak of the dead rabbits. However, they celebrate the death of the dead rabbits, and specifically Valen, annually, because without that, they're nothing, right? That's a great victory.
And then what happens is John C. Reilly's character, that police officer, tries to catch Amsterdam for having nailed the dead rabbit to the post. John C. Reilly is eventually killed and displayed by the dead rabbits, and that really stirs a shock through the 5 points, like a really big shock through the 5 points.
Kind of like Crucified, as I recall, like kind of, right? I mean,
yeah, almost, and it was actually too, there's like a little, we didn't really talk about it, but it was a scene with a pocket watch and how he was like showing off to like these aristocrats of how safe the 5 points is that he left his pocket watch there. So there's just like a motif there. That's not.
I vaguely remember it, but yeah, I the thing I remember about his character, I mean, is, well, Day-Lewis calls it out in plain sight, so I don't even know if it's worth mentioning, but just that he's almost delusional about his position, right? That like he can't accept that he's totally corrupt, And Day-Lewis has that great scene where he's like, I forget what he says exactly, but it's just like I don't have the time for whatever moral conundrum you're going through right now. Just, fucking get this shit done, right? Maybe half believes the bullshit he's saying, like, I'm still loyal to your dad. I'm probably reaching there, but whatever. Right, he dies, right. He deserves it. Fuck him.
And then shortly after that, Johnny is found again because Johnny reveals to Amsterdam that he had ratted on him, and Amsterdam said like, all right, I'll give you tonight to hop out of town.
Which I thought was a mistake, because I thought, Johnny's just going to jump right back to Day-Lewis, which is actually what he ends up doing exactly, but doesn't work out.
But Day-Lewis doesn't respect that. So Day-Lewis,
he's like, you're a rat bastard.
Yeah. So the butcher kills Johnny too and stabs him on top of a fence.
They just euthanize him out of mercy, right?
Yep.
Is how that scene goes.
They just mercy kill him. So then what happens next is Tweed comes to DiCaprio saying that he wants to side with them because they're going to get them the Irish vote. Basically, the bargain in return is that, we have to get an Irish sheriff elected. So they choose Monk, who actually does a really good job, like a much better job than his opponent. And there was definitely cheating going on from both sides for the voting. Like people were voting once with beards and then shaving and voting again. Someone voted 3 times and they said, well, you got to vote more.
Hey, you call that doing your civic duty? I think you said, right? You've only voted. Yeah. It's like
you only voted 3 times. Get in there. So Monk eventually wins, but it doesn't last long before Daniel Day-Lewis kills him publicly and makes a really big show of it. So Monk is killed publicly and he's like notch 45 and he hits him with his club and it's kind of fucked up. I think that one is kind of alluding to the assassination of JFK because in a weird way, it is like an Irish Catholic thing. Irish Catholics think that highly of Kennedy, where like it was at the beginning of The Departed. Remember when Jack Nicholson was doing like the voiceover? He was like, in the 1800s, they were treating us like shit. By the 60s, we had the presidency. So like also it's a big deal for like Irish Catholic culture, thinking about Kennedy and assassinations of once a Catholic gets into office, they get killed.
But yeah, it's a sad affair too, because like you know, he gives this big, great speech. You know, it sounds good. Nobody really, it's crickets, and then D. Lewis just kills him in plain sight. You know, so he's just too afraid.
And then the draft starts really gaining steam, and you know, there's starting to be some small time riots just like percolating. The two other sides at like from Monk's funeral, they decide to challenge each other, and then they you know, they meet for like a council and make the battle plans. They choose the weapons, like no rifles, just kind of like
just no handguns at all, no pistols, no anything. And you know, D. Lewis applauds that. You know, it's like personal, kind of like the Joker. You know, it's intimate and whatever. You know, so
swords, battle axes, clubs, that kind of stuff, all
right.
all on the table. Just no pistols, no rifles, no anything like that, no firearms. So the small time riots break into huge riots, which were true things that happened where people did not want to be drafted. They, you know, just wanted to make their own way. You know what I mean? They didn't want to fight in the Civil War. They just wanted to, you know, basically make their own existence. So there's a standoff between the two, you know, the new dead rabbits and the natives, and there's a standoff between the US military and rioters, and the military turns on the mob and starts just firing and killing.
Yeah, blindly. Yeah, just starts firing into the crowd. Yeah. It's indiscriminate, right? The government fucks everybody, you know.
Yeah. So. And the one thing that's like about the riots that was embellished is I don't think there's actually cannon fire ever shot into the mob. There was shooting like in the streets, like you saw. So in a way, like it totally fucks up the battle that the dead rabbits and the natives were gonna have. Amsterdam and Bill still managed to fight, but it's like in
everybody else is just gone. They're like, fuck this shit, right? And it's just Amsterdam and Bill and this the fog of war, the dust and debris.
Bill kind of had the jump on him, like he was slashing at his legs and like being stealthy.
It all flows seamlessly, you know. This is just another excuse for me to say that like Scorsese's editor, I normally don't notice an editor's work, and maybe that's like a bad thing. I don't know. But like I don't think it is. Like she's probably one of the very few editors I've ever noticed and been like, that was really good. You know, like I'm sure this was a nightmare to assemble. Maybe not Apocalypse Now levels, but like this is a historical epic. I mean, I'm sure it's like 3 hours long, and
yeah, she's really fucking good. And she also doesn't always, especially with Scorsese's style too, sometimes there will be like continuity errors.
I was gonna point out a really stupid one when you were talking about Nicholson's intro to The Departed. He's smoking a cigarette and then he's not. Like the cigarette disappears. I noticed that. I'm a genius.
Like there is one scene like right before Monk gets assassinated, he has the club in his right hand and then he has it in his left. Again, like very small continuity errors, but like it's the way that they film. But so the dust settles from like a large explosion between the two when they were about to scrap. You could tell right away that Bill's mortally wounded. He's got like some like gash like right in his ribs. So he wants to go down like a man, though. He wants to go down like a fighter. Eggs on Amsterdam to finish him off, and they do. And you know, his eye closes. So Bill is dead, and then they go through the aftermath. Jimmy had died because, like in the real riots, they turned on black people too, because like it was kind of like we're not going to die for you, that kind of thing. So
there's so much infighting. It's just, I mean, the government's killing everybody. People are within their selected groups are killing each other. I mean, it's just pure bloodshed. The blood is so thick that splashy, which might be a little dramatic, but I mean, a bloody mess by the end of the film. Everybody's dead. It's miserable. It's horrible. I suppose that's the point that should be emphasized. Nobody wins this one.
But Amsterdam and Jenny do leave for San Francisco. It kind of ends where they bury Bill the Butcher right next to Priest Vallon. They do like a time jump where they go from like the 1860s to the 80s, and then the Empire State Building. It ends with the World Trade Center. And the thing is this movie began, and this will lead into, impact on society. In the middle of this movie being filmed, the 9/11 attacks happened. They purposefully left the towers up for the movie.
Which I want to say I'm actually glad about, because so many movies from that time didn't do that. Like they cut it out of like respect, and I'm like, I'm not sure this was the last chance for the two towers to appear in film, and I feel like, well, I don't know, I just like something about that.
Well, and it's also an opportunity to say like bloodshed's still not over. It's still a little bit of chaos going on, especially right now.
Yeah, our technology moves forward incrementally. I do not think human evolution, or whatever the hell you want to call it, is nearly as linear, right? I mean,
it's a lot slower. So
actually, that ties in with us talking about cultures integrating, and that takes a long time too, right?
Exactly. I mean, yeah. So. Again, just a little more into, impact on society. Like we were saying earlier, it's pretty timeless. Like a lot of improvement that you see since the Gangs of New York times, but that also makes you think of like how much more there is to improve. So my recommendations are another Irish Martin Scorsese flick, The Departed. This has had like a lot of credit in recent years. It won Best Picture, got Scorsese his Oscar. That's a really, really great movie. And then I would recommend The Aviator, because The Aviator was the film that was right after this one, and like the next collaboration with DiCaprio and Scorsese. I think DiCaprio was better in The Aviator than he was in Gangs of New York, but I like Gangs of New York as a film better than The Aviator.
Yeah. My recommendations in the more abstract, The Departed is my definite recommendation.
Right.
In the abstract, I mean, like I said, Outlander, maybe The Warriors, I mean, like it, because it's gangs. Those would be my recommendations. I think that's it, honestly, for me. So,
all right. Great. Well, let's get into our ratings then. Out of 5 stars, Dakota, what are you going to give Gangs of New York?
4.5. But again, like kind of what I was saying, like this came out nowadays, I'd probably give it a 5. Like so, it's a lesser Scorsese film, but to me, it's just a great film.
Yeah, 20 years later, it's a really solid 4.5 as well. Same thing. It's a lesser Scorsese film, but like the third tier of Scorsese films is a lot of people's first tier.
Right. Yeah.
I still really like it. I think it's more timeless than a lot of, even the ones in the mid-tier range for Scorsese. But yeah, I give it 4.5 stars. I'd be tempted to give it 5 stars if it were a little fresher in my mind. I would just, maybe just the one thing's dragging it back is like, I don't think DiCaprio was bad at all in this movie, but he just wasn't like at the height of his powers, I guess, like, because he's an actor I think that's improved as he's gone on.
DiCaprio's the rare instance where it's actually a great actor, right? Yes. I think there was always potential in DiCaprio, and I think it's gradually been unlocked, right? I mean, I think now everybody recognizes he's great, All
right, so now that we have the ratings in, I'd just like to remind everybody at home to subscribe, hit the like button, tell your friends, your friends that like really like movies. Tell them about us. We're going to try to do a lot of different stuff this year. Don't watch the
Spoiler Alert podcast, and you're not sure if you can be friends anymore. I mean, just if you're that lame where you don't watch the Spoiler Alert podcast, I mean, what do you really know? Yeah.
And especially, in times like these. On that note, I'm Nate.
And I'm Dakota.
We are the Spoiler Alert podcast, and happy St. Patrick's Day.